Hi everybody, this is Mike Tallon again with part 2 of a video on the treatment of hereditary hemochromatosis. In this one we're going to speak more about the history than the modern treatment, which was the last video. You will recall that hereditary hemochromatosis is the genetic condition that's at the heart of a book that I've recently written. The book is entitled Incompatible with Life, a memoir of grave illness, great love, and survival that details my year of almost dying from hereditary hemochromatosis. You can read the introduction of this excellent book at michaeljtallon.com. And please, if you do, leave a comment. It would help me get the thing published. It's a great book. So, we covered in the last video that the treatment for hereditary hemochromatosis is you need to get the excess iron out of the body. And the way that you do that, since you can't, pull out the heart and the liver and the and the glands and squeeze them to remove the iron, you need to remove the iron-rich blood. And by removing the iron-rich blood, you force the body to produce new blood using the iron that's stored in the system, because you have removed people's the iron that people are ingesting through their diet. This one we're going to talk about the history, because I just think it's fascinating. So the treatment that was used to save my life, phlebotomy, bloodletting, vein venting, was first designed by Hippocrates in ancient Greece. It was later used in the Middle Ages when we were all about balancing the humors, which actually is something that confused me when I was in junior high school and first learned about the balancing of humors, because they said that the humors were the blood, the phlegm, the bile, the black bile, and the yellow bile. And what I didn't understand was I understood that they were doing bloodletting, but how did you balance the humors if you just removed the blood? Was there another guy whose job it was to remove the phlegm? That would be a gross job. Or the bile? Didn't make any sense to me. Well, if it doesn't make sense to you, I will answer that question in this video. But first we got to talk about Hippocrates. So Hippocrates wasn't the first doctor in ancient Greece. That was Galen, which, if I'm recalling correctly from when I was teaching global studies in Brooklyn, go FDR Cougars. But Hippocrates was maybe what we could call the first medical theoretician. He observed the world he lived in, particularly as it pertained to health, illness, and death, and he noted some things through careful observation. He noted that someone who is healthy has a body that he would say is harmonious or eucratious. And when someone was sick, their body was dyscratious. He further noted that the body, in order to survive, needs to take things in from the outside world. He noted further that the way that the body takes things in from the outside world is either through respiration, breathing, or ingestion, eating and drinking. And he theorized that the world was largely eucratious, harmonious, and so if a body had become dyscratious, had become disharmonious, then what you needed to do first and foremost was to make sure that whatever was going into the body was clean and pure and balanced, eucratious. And so, if someone was sick, or if someone had suffered a wound in battle, and they came to Hippocrates, the first thing you do is clean the wound, open up the windows, make sure the air is clean, and then if they're going to eat, to make sure that they have clean food and water to eat, to make sure that what's going into the body is eucratious. Remember this, there'll be a quiz later. He further observed that there were different features inside the body that must have something to do with this eucratia, dyscrasia, ingestion, and how the things from the outside world got to the body. One of those things inside the body was blood. Interestingly, the ancient Greeks didn't know anything about the circulatory system. The actual belief was that the blood kind of sloshed around inside your body like the tides move. It's not a bad theory. It's not right, but he did correctly theorize that the blood that was inside the body was responsible for transporting the stuff from the outside world to the different parts of the body. And he figured if he was going to understand the system of health and illness, he was going to need to know something about that blood. So he took a sample. He actually took a lot of samples from a lot of different people. For most healthy people, he noted some things about the blood that were different from the unhealthy people. And the way that he did this is fascinating. First thing he did is he takes the samples of blood and he is going to observe them and maybe observe if there's any change in them. So he puts the blood in a glass, in a container, and covers it up and leaves it for a day. And he notices something fascinating when he comes back. When he comes back and examines the blood, he notes that it's separated now. It's no longer just this consistent one fluid. It's 4 separate fluids with different features. On the top, there's this kind of clearish, thin layer that he calls the phlegma. Below that, there's this kind of whitish, yellowish level that he calls the yellow bile, or the melancholiae or something. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. It's the root of our word melancholy. And below that, there's this reddish layer that's a little bit thicker than the other two, and he calls that the chyme. And beneath that, there's like kind of a almost black sludgy a layer, and he calls that the chole, the bile. So that's the first thing. Whereas I thought the 4 humors of the body that we talked about when we talked about barbershops in the Middle Ages were 4 different things: your blood, your snot, and your bile in your stomach. To Hippocrates and to those barbers in the Middle Ages, all 4 of what became known as the humors were inside the blood. They were 4 different levels. And Hippocrates further noted that most people who were healthy, who were eucratious, who were balanced, these layers were pretty standardized. And yet when someone was wounded or dyscratious, those 4 layers could be wildly out of proportion to the normal. If someone had been wounded in battle, if someone had been stabbed with a sword and then brought to his office the next day, that secondary layer, that melancholiae, that yellow bile, there'd be a lot more of it, and it would be a lot thicker. And that bottom layer, that chole, that bile, would be a lot thicker too. And Hippocrates theorized that this is the problem, and the solution to making sure that this person returns to health, or to do the best you could to get them to return to health, was to figure out how to get these 4 humors inside the blood to balance. He had figured out the first part of that by noting that ingestion and respiration are what are somehow impacting this red stuff that's inside the body, this blood. And if we make sure that stuff's clean, if we make sure the air and the water and the food are clean, that's going to allow the body to revert back to its natural state of eucrasia, of balance and harmony, and to leave dyscrasia. But in order to do that, in order to allow the blood to rebalance itself, you have to take out the dyscratious blood. You have to take out the unbalanced blood. Every time I heard about the balancing of humors before I started reading about Hippocrates and hemochromatosis, which of course he didn't know he would have been treating, but he could have treated well, the idea that you would, Lincoln gets shot in the head and so you bleed him didn't make any sense to me. But they were still working on Hippocrates' theory that we needed to balance those 4 humors. And since they didn't know what these things were, as we do now, that was the best idea they possibly had. Now, you may have figured this out already, I presume you have, that those 4 layers of blood are the different parts of the blood. That top layer, that phlegma, is the plasma. That secondary layer, that yellowish layer, is the white blood cells. Beneath that, the chyme are the red blood cells. And then beneath that, the coal, the bile, is clotted blood. And so Hippocrates would treat his patients by bleeding them, by removing the discretious blood, and then covering the wound, feeding them clean water, clean food, making sure they have clean air to breathe, and you allow the body to reset itself by balancing the humors. I don't know how well that worked for men wounded in battle, or people with with leukemia or cancer or something. You have no idea about that at the time. But the one disease that this treatment absolutely works for is hereditary hemochromatosis. My blood, when I was at my sickest, when my ferritin levels were sky high, my blood was discretious. And the way that we rebalanced that was exactly what Hippocrates would have done 2,500 years ago if I had presented in his office with this disease. He removed the blood that was discretious, the iron-rich, iron-toxifying blood, and sealed the wound and forced my body to create eucratious blood, which he would also help prevent by making sure that I was eating food that was clean. And now in that case, it would have had to be, no beef, no Guinness. But the treatment that they used to save my life was not just one designed by Hippocrates, but it was one where the theory still holds. We had to get my body and the body of everyone who has been treated with phlebotomy back to eucrasia, back to balance. And I just find that to be endlessly fascinating. This disease that almost killed me came from a Neanderthal ancestor 40,000 years ago. 40,000 years later, I'm fighting for my life on the cardiac ward of Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. And if Hippocrates had been my doctor, he would have been able to treat me and possibly cure me. Just fascinating. At least I think so. By the way, that story, as well as many others that I find fascinating anyway, are in that book, Incompatible with Life, a memoir of grave illness, great love, and survival. Please read the introduction at michaeljtallon.com and leave a comment, and I'll be back with another video. I think I'm going to try and do one soon on CRISPR technology, gene replacement technology, which may be developed in the next 10 years or so, that would allow us to actually treat the genetic condition rather than just dealing with the symptoms. And until then, until we get to the next video, I will just say love to you all and thank you for watching. Bye-bye.